What's up, gamers? DreamcastGuy here, and this is Does It Suck? The show where we take a deep dive look at a new game and see what's good or bad about it. I've been playing a bunch of Vampire the Masquerade Swansong for the last week, and this game is very much a bit of a mess. To be honest, I had pretty much no fun with the entire thing, and I want to try and rip into what's going on with this, because at least the game is unique. Now, please, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and now let's shed some blood. Now, Vampire the Masquerade is obviously based on the classic tabletop RPG. Now, in that, there is a single rule that exists to all vampires on the planet. They realize that vampires are outnumbered by humans like 10,000 to 1. Vampires are very, very rare. There's just a couple of them on the entire planet. The ones that do exist are rich and powerful. They're cool and elusive. But they purposefully live in the shadows, and the rules to staying in the shadows are called the Masquerade. It's role-playing as the other humans around you, maintaining that secrecy above all else. This game, Swansong, is basically an interactive movie. It's a series of short conversations that have you asking questions, trying to figure things out, and sometimes getting completely screwed over by the consequences of the things you say. The problem is, this feels very, very, very half done. Like, the biggest problem I have with it is because this is just conversations, there is zero combat, there's zero real clues. A lot of this just feels like being a detective, but fumbling around in the dark. Now, more than anything else, we have to talk about the fact that the writing in this game is very, very overwhelming. Because as you're going through this game, you're constantly trying to be thrown into a series of mysteries, trying to figure out who died, what's going on, going through different crime scenes, and a lot of times, as I mentioned earlier, trying to blend in with other humans around you. Now, during the course of this, you play as different heroes that have different abilities. There's people like Caleb, who's kind of the strongman. He's an ancient vampire who has a very lot of ability to influence and overpower people mentally. There's Laisha, who can turn invisible or even imitate different costumes. She can straight up just mimic your clothes and walk around inside of detective scenes and stuff. There's also things like MM. She's able to slip in and out of different situations and a lot of times outsmart her enemies. Now, these people, as different as they are, very much play the exact same. It's just all picking from very limited dialogue options. Now, the major part of this that I feel like is supposed to be role-playing game-like is this skill point system. So whenever you're trying to do these different levels, the whole game is broken down into these separate missions. Now, when you're in these missions, you have what is essentially like a stamina meter. It's right above me here. It's this blue bar. Now, as you're going through these conversations, you can choose to expend some of your stamina to boost your own skills. So if you're trying to influence somebody with intimidation or persuasion, or trying to crack their mind through fear, you can assert a little bit of extra will. But there's a huge drawback to this. Throughout the course of this game, there are these different parts where you're trying to explore and gather up different evidence. A lot of times, if you're trying to grill or quiz somebody, it helps to know something like hacking into their computer or breaking into their safe beforehand to have additional information. The issue is that a lot of this consumes those very limited skill points. In order to actually use your own special abilities, you have to spend these, which means that a lot of times there is this terrible yin and yang that exists at the center of Swansong. Your character is built out on the stat sheet, but you choose a speciality, whether it is a detective or somebody that's going to be better at being argumentative. But because of this, you're always going to suck at something. If you make yourself have a bunch of additional skill points, you might be able to push people around verbally, but then when it comes to trying to crack clues, if you get too tired, you straight up cannot pick up some additional clues. You can't break into evidence lockers and figure out those extra little hidden bits. So it feels like you're always failing at something. If you do not have enough skill points to push people around in conversations, you will fail again and again and again, which to me, it became frustrating for a bit to have just random humans overpower you in a conversation because you don't have enough stamina to try and take them down. Now, there is some dice rolls. If you tie with somebody, it does this dice roll, but for some reason, I failed pretty much every single dice roll in the entire game. If you can't completely blow somebody out of the water with your own magical essence, then you're pretty much just screwed. But let's talk about hunger. vampires have this very interesting kinetic ability about them in the Vampire the Masquerade universe, which is called the Beast. Essentially, the more hungry you get, the more overwhelmed you become. It makes it so that if you get too hungry, you may attack somebody against your own will. If you build up too much hunger, there are special magical abilities that are very, very useful inside of these conversations, but at times, using them comes at this heavy cost. Now, thankfully, you can keep the hunger at bay. There is this very strange feeding system where you have to try and draw people away from the pack. Since most of this game is just walking around among different humans, you have to draw them into a designated safe zone, and then there's this very dumb mini game where you have to try and suck them off. Now, if you do this carefully enough, they stay alive, you get the blood, and it reduces your hunger. If you drink too much blood, they die, which increases the difficulty of the rest of the game. Now, this is an interesting idea, but it just becomes an extra meter that you're constantly trying to maintain. It makes it so you're constantly trying to worry about, all right, am I losing too many skill points? Am I losing too much hunger? Am I being too overwhelmed by the beast to have a normal talk with normal people in a normal fashion? Now, more than all of that, I'm sure you've noticed the biggest drawback to Swansong, which is that the animation sucks. There practically isn't animation. Character models are incredibly stiff, from their faces being practically paralyzed to the fact that they don't move their arms and legs. There's also a lot of very, very glitchy animations. Like, here's an example right here. Times where people just stand in the background and they practically click back and forth, waiting for you to talk to them, waiting to give them a response. It's very, very distracting to see just how low budget this game is. And it kind of goes parlayed with the fact that I do enjoy the voice acting quite a bit. Like, if there was any aspect of this game that I did genuinely enjoy, it's the fact that I do feel like the voice actors really managed to convey what's going on well. Like, when they're angry, you can feel the anger in their voice. Like, times when they're scared, you do sense that little bit of quiver inside of it. I respect the heck out of this voice acting cast, because for such a bad script, they did manage to pull off quite a bit of gravitas. But that does go down to this weird other glitch. So it sounds like they did not properly tune and equalize the different audio levels. Now, I say this because I'm an editor. Obviously, I edit all these videos myself. A lot of times characters will sound at different audio levels when they're talking. So it sounds like perhaps they were in different sound booths, or they didn't normalize it, or maybe they recorded some of the lines months apart and it sounds very, very strange. But sometimes people literally be like, "We have to save them. I'm walking north." It's like, what the heck was that? What happened right there? And on top of that, I do feel like 95% of the people who play this game are not going to understand the story. I've read the Vampire the Masquerade instruction manuals. I've played the tabletop RPG years and years ago, so I understand a lot of the terminology going into this. But while you're playing this, they throw out so many different hierarchies and factions and clans. There's the Nosferatu versus the Bruja. I mean, straight up, I decided to write this down. Some of the different groups that you're going to have to deal with are things like the Primogen, the Sires, the Kindred, the Elders, the Princes, the Sewer Rats, the Heralds, the Seers, the Protectors, the Founders, the Thin Bloods, and more. Like, this is just a couple of the factions that you have to deal with. You constantly have to worry about during these conversations who outranks you, who's beneath you, who's predator, who's prey, and it becomes this big soup of boredom. A lot of times, even as I was trying to go deeper into this game and really take it seriously, I couldn't, because people constantly were just throwing out different boring pieces of lore that felt so disconnected that they never really paid off. Now, additionally, we do need to talk about the fact that the only real conflicts that exist in this game is this system called confrontation. While you're playing this game, occasionally you get into arguments. Now, these have a very strict win or loss situation in it. People want a specific answer. This is typically when you're going to use the most of your skill points. It's kind of like the boss battles. Now, if you succeed in them, you go on. A lot of times there is an interesting benefit that exists for the rest of the game. Let me give you a specific example of one of these tests and how it benefits the rest of the story. So there's a time where one of the vampires that we play as is captured and put in a magical memory prison. Now, the quicker you manage to escape this, the more flawlessly you manage to break out of these barriers and stuff like that, you manage to keep some of your memories. If you screw up, if you miss clues, if you miss evidence, your character permanently loses these aspects of her personality. So later on in conversations, you can't perform as well because, quite frankly, you've forgotten parts of your own past. Whereas if you do things right, if you are careful, if you conversate and manipulate people properly, you can stay as whole as you were when you went into it. Now, these conflicts, though, as much as they try and increase the tension and turn up the pressure, they fail absolutely, in my opinion. They are just so freaking stale, like everything else. Like a lot of times, because I don't care about the characters and I don't care about this conflict, I don't care about these boss battles. Like, who cares if these characters die? Because yes, if you actually have a conversation bad enough, there is permadeath. They'll just shoot your character in the freaking head. I decided to experiment with it. Yeah, your characters will die and they will stay dead. But even after beating the game, I kind of wished that they had just stayed dead and I'd saved myself a lot of time. Okay, well, we've heard a lot of good and a lot of bad. Oh gosh, I guess we heard nothing good. But anyways, let's go over the ratings board and put a big number on it. I am giving Vampire the Masquerade Swansong a 4 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching this video, gamers, and holy heck, please do not buy this game because there is much better versions of Vampire the Masquerade out there. This is a big ol' waste of time. But please, I want you to press the like button. I think that's supposed to be like a Count Chocula voice. Anyways, thank you for watching. Please subscribe and keep dreaming. Whoa. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.